Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I gather there might be one or two people in the side room, so my greetings to them as well. My name's Councillor White, John White. I'm chairman this evening. On my left, I have my vice chairman, Councillor Heaney, and the other councillors on the two sprigs either side are the ones that will ultimately debate and vote on each of the applications in front of us tonight. On my immediate left and right are the TDC officers, including Head of Planning and the committee solicitor. This is a formal committee, and it's very important that councillors can hear all of the presentations and the debate. Therefore, I would respectfully ask you to remain quiet and not to interrupt the speakers. At this time, I would also put a little warning in. I'm afraid our sound system's been on use at the inquiry all day, so we're just keeping our fingers crossed that the batteries hold up this evening. But if you find that you can't hear any of the debate, please stick your hand up and we'll try and swap some microphones so that you can. The order of business for the planning applications tonight are as usual, namely the officer will give a presentation and then we'd have public speaking. There are two items on the agenda which are repeated and therefore they won't take any public speaking. Any further comment from the officer, and then the committee members will ask questions, debate and finally vote. I should add that this meeting is being recorded by the council and will be available on the council website in approximately 10 days' time. So let's go to the agenda. Any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Baker with no substitute.
Thank you very much. And to the minutes of the last meeting, which I'd remind you was the 16th of October, held here, are there any omissions, additions or anything else that councillors want to add or challenge? If not, can I take them as a true and correct record, please? I have, yes, in agreement. Right, I will do that. Now we go to declarations of interest. I'll start, there'll be quite a few, I think. I'll start in that item A4, that is the item 01230. This is a full application and it's at Point Clear, which is my home ward, but I shall still take part in the debate. Right. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. I wish to declare an interest on agenda item 13, A9, 1801694, 34 Low Road. The applicants are personally known to me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heaney.
I'm going to have to borrow your mic, because I don't seem to have got one today, sorry. I was not here when the Rouse's Farm development was discussed, which is 17/01229/out, land adjacent to the rear of 755 and 757 St John's Road, Clacton. So I will be leaving the chamber if there's a seat, or otherwise withdrawing backwards. So I won't be taking part in the debate.
Thank you very much. Any further? Yes, Councillor Everett.
Item number 8, A4, 55 Colne Way, 18/01230. I'm predetermined on that, so I'll be withdrawing from the room.
And Mike Brown.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, I'm ward councillor for Weeley, and I'm very predetermined on the development out here, 17/02162 out. So I shan't be taking any part in it.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Cawthron.
Yes, item A1, I wasn't here in August for the original hearing of that, so I won't be taking part.
Thank you very much. Any further declarations? No, right. I have not received any questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 37. And then in that case we move straight to A1. This is land south of Thorpe Road, Weeley. It is 17026162. This is an outline application. It's to be found pages 9 to 48 in your agenda.
I don't think they can hear at the back.
No? Sorry, there was some indication that people couldn't hear me. Now, is that any better? Right, good. Right, so we are on item A1, and that's, as I say, repeated on pages 9 to 48. Turn to Kath Bignor, Head of Planning, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, as you said, this is an outline application with all matters reserved except for access for 280 dwellings and other associated infrastructure on land to the rear of these offices. This map shows the application site in red. Oh, I beg your pardon. In red. Running. It's outlined in red. Oh, it looks red on my screen and brown on yours. It's labelled helpfully the site, so we know where it is. It's to the rear of these buildings, and it runs right down to the railway line. This application was reported to Planning Committee on the 21st of August this year, and that evening the Planning Committee resolved that consideration of this application be deferred until the outcome of the Part 2 examination of the Council's local plan, due to the fact the application is premature to the local plan process and will undermine the process if determined at this stage. And I think the crux of members' discussion and their concerns that evening that led them to that decision was that a number of people in the community have submitted comments in response to the publication of the local plan, and those concerns, objections and comments haven't been through the full process, i.e. they haven't been examined by the examination in public inspector who looks at the local plan. And there was a feeling amongst the committee in their discussion that that should happen so that it's a properly plan-led system and development of the site, rather than the application or the development coming forward via a planning application prior to the local plan process being seen through. Since that time, we've received a letter from solicitors on behalf of the applicant and some third-party letters, and they are summarised on your green update sheet in front of you. Many of the issues that are raised are the same or very similar to comments that were received before and are reported in the main committee report. But nonetheless, they're summarised there by officers. But overall, none of the issues raised are considered to change significantly the content of the report, or certainly the recommendation. And I will touch on some of those issues now. So firstly, the applicant wrote requesting that the committee reconsider the planning application. Obviously, the council has a duty to determine planning applications to it, can be approved or refused. Sometimes the committee does defer planning applications, but that's really in order to give an applicant the opportunity to provide additional information or perhaps amend a scheme to improve it to a point where the committee is able to approve that proposal. The applicant's letter alerts the council to its intention to appeal, and it also highlights the potential financial cost to the council of defending an appeal if on that basis. Okay. Then the applicant goes on to discuss prematurity, and that's also an issue that the third parties have raised. So that's the same issue that committee debated at the last committee meeting, and I'll come back to that one in a couple of minutes. The applicants also highlight the need for the council to make consistent decisions and talk about a number of decisions that this committee has made where it's approved other sites that are in the emerging local plan for residential development, and some of them quite substantial. So members will recall approving planning permission for Rouse's Farm in Clacton. In fact, that application is back before you for a different reason this evening. Also Robinson Road in Brightlingsea and Low Road in Dovercourt. But it's only fair to point out that in those cases, there wasn't significant objection to the local plan allocations in those cases. Whereas in the case of the Weeley site that you're looking at this evening, there are still outstanding objections to that proposal, to that allocation. You might remember, though, the Low Road Dovercourt application itself did generate objections, but they weren't against the local plan allocation, they were just against the planning application itself. The applicants did complain that they weren't aware of a letter of objection that was presented to the last meeting. It had come in very last minute, and obviously we do our utmost to try and get things onto the portal and onto the update sheet. But the applicants weren't aware of one of the letters that came in last time. And on a similar sort of housekeeping note, if you like, the third parties have also complained about the decision not to allow public speaking at committee tonight. That is in line with the Council's adopted policy for speaking at committee, where there's a deferred item that's brought back. The scheme doesn't allow for public speaking. And then finally, the applicants, as I've mentioned before, have indicated their intention to appeal unless the planning application is approved. And they wrote really asking, does the council want to reconsider the application before an appeal is submitted? As it stands, the applicant would have to appeal against non-determination, i.e. the failure of the council to come to a decision within a reasonable timescale. Tonight, members could approve the application in line with the recommendation, or could refuse planning permission and set out clearly the reasons for that, and then the applicant would be appealing against specific reasons rather than the sort of more open non-determination. And then I just mentioned there that Local Plan Committee came to a view a few weeks ago about the way to apply policy, and that's something that the officers are taking into account, and that's about how much weight really can be given to emerging as opposed to saved policies, and that's perhaps something members of the committee might want to discuss in a bit more detail later. So turning now in a little bit more detail to prematurity. There are two quite helpful paragraphs in the MPPF on this subject. I've put them there in full. I'm sorry, it's a rather crowded slide, but it just helps us to sort of get the wording correctly. If we just run through the parts of that paragraph. So this is to help us understand how much weight can be given to policies in emerging plans. So in this case, how much weight can be given to the policy in the emerging plan that allocates the site that's the subject of this application for development. So Part A says that the stage of preparation of the emerging plan is important. So the more advanced it is in its preparation, the greater weight that can be given. Now, in our case, the local plan has been through a number of statutory stages, and those do include consultation. And certainly people in Weeley have had an opportunity to see those proposals, they've made their views known, and the local plan committee have considered them, and indeed full council considered them in the context of the whole plan and agreed nonetheless to submit that plan, including this allocation, to government for examination. However, it hasn't yet been examined. Section 1 of the plan has started its examination process, but the part of the plan where this policy sits hasn't yet been examined. And we have appeal decisions which have indicated that we should only give limited weight to emerging policies at this particular time. Okay, turning to the second point, to B, the extent to which there are unresolved objections to relevant policies. I've already mentioned that there are unresolved objections to this policy in the emerging local plan. In fact, more objections than there have been to other allocations, and in particular those ones that have already been brought forward through planning applications and approved. and those concerns related to a wide variety of issues that are largely replicated in people's comments on the planning application itself. So they include the impact on the farmland, loss of open space, the feasibility of providing the footbridge over the railway line, overdevelopment, questioning whether employment on the site is viable, saying that scale of development would be disproportionate for Weeley. So those sorts of issues. The second paragraph in the MPPF that talks about prematurity sets out in what circumstances prematurity might be used as a reason to resist a development coming forward. So it says that both A and B must apply. So firstly A, that the development is so substantial or its cumulative effect so significant that to grant permission would undermine the plan-making process by predetermining decisions about the scale, location or phasing of new development that are central to an emerging plan. My interpretation of that would be that this proposal is certainly substantial, and particularly in relation to the existing village of Weeley, but I would say it's not central to the plan itself. So 280 dwellings is not sort of central to a plan that allocates land for or delivers 11,000 dwellings. And then secondly, B has to apply as well, that the emerging plan is at an advanced stage, but is not yet formally part of the development plan for the area. Well, it is advanced in that it's been through many stages of its development, but it's still at a point where it can't be given significant weight because it hasn't yet been examined. So leading on to the recommendation, it remains unchanged from the previous committee that the Head of Planning is authorised to grant planning permission for the development subject to a legal agreement and conditions as set out in the report. And that recommendation takes into account all of those issues that are described in the officer's report, including the allocation of the plan of the site within the emerging plan, the MPPF's guidance about continuing to deliver housing and increasing the rate of housing delivery, and also the previous decisions of this committee. Chairman, that's all I was going to say at this stage.
Right. Now, councillors, we've got no public speaking. So, councillors, it's up to you. I look to you now for speakers. And nobody is forthcoming.
Richard, I think. I'll do it if Richard won't.
Councillor Everett, are you indicating? Sorry, you were just getting your papers, right?
Yes, he's getting
Right. Thank you for that. Right, Councillor Everett.
Go on, I'll kick off. I'm concerned. I'm concerned because we as a committee, not a few weeks ago, made a decision on this, and it's brought back already to us. Now, I understand why that might be, but I deal in politics, and politics is how things look to the public. And the public, I think, justifiably have questions about how that process has happened in the way that it has. I personally, as the chairman knows because I've argued with him about it, feel that it was unwise to not allow public speaking tonight, because I feel that for us as a committee to make a proper rational decision, we need to be in possession of all of the facts. We have had the facts from the developer in a solicitor's letter, which we have now all seen. There have been a number of letters from different members of the public because of the fact they've been told they can't speak tonight. And so I'm a bit concerned that members of this committee are all not necessarily working on the same information as each other, because you don't know which letters they've read and which they hadn't. And so, therefore, I would argue that it would actually be better to have allowed public speaking on this application, because then at least we would be working to all the same information to the people that we'd listen to. That said, let's get into the nitty-gritty of some of the things that have come to our attention because of letters that have come from outside. I'll start with the letter from the applicant's solicitors, and I'll read out to you paragraph 23 from their letter, next steps. If the council is not willing to approve this application, then our client will immediately lodge an appeal and request that appeal be dealt with by way of a local inquiry. In our experience, such a request is likely to be met. Our client will then assemble a team for this inquiry, which will include ourselves, leading counsel, a planning consultant, architect and highways consultant. We estimate that our client's outlay will be in the order of £100,000 or more. Our client will seek this sum from the council in light of the officer's report to the planning committee, and the merits of the proposal is highly likely to recover these costs. We would urge officers to advise members that this is also their view. Personally, I see that as bullying. I think it's important that we, as a group of councillors, have all of the information in front of us and not just some bits that we might or might not have read from the various communications that have come from people in this room and from outside. And so I would like to suggest that we actually defer this meeting till the next meeting, allow public speaking so that we can get a consistent view, and make sure that we are actually speaking from the same hymn sheet and we're all taking decisions on the same information.
Further speakers?
I'll go next, if you like.
Councillor Heaney?
Well, I have to say, in this case, I support the chairman with not having public speaking, because we always don't have we don't have public speaking on deferred applications, and we can't just change it for this application because we think it was a good idea. It's either our policy or it isn't our policy. But I have to go on to what I was going to say is we have approved other sites in the emerging local plan, but no one on these sites had written in to the inspector against the sites. Now, we've said, as a council, that we've asked people to write in to the inspector with what they feel about these sites, and we can't totally ignore them. And I'm sure Rose will appeal and will probably get approval, as this site is in the local plan, and we will get costs against us. But if we go to paragraph NPPF, the NP National Planning Policy Framework, para 47, which was brought up on the screen, it is a substantial development for Weeley, which is A, and B also applies. But I'm afraid I really haven't changed my mind since last time, because you can't ask people to write in so the inspector can look at what they've said and then ignore it. I know this is a muddle because the government allows, I have to say that I don't think that the policies or the laws are correct, because I know, and I'm talking about an ideal world, which of course doesn't exist, but I'm sure in the last plan, and I know things have changed now, this time, when you wrote in about something, and I was elected to on the back of a application which 3,000 people had written in against, which I was against myself, I really can't feel I can vote for this because of these reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, other speakers? Councillor, yes. Yes, Councillor Benison.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yes, I took great note of Mrs Bicknell's guidance towards us. Sorry. Yes, we all took note of Kath Bicknell's presentation to us, and including the paragraph 49 of the NPPF. But I disagree that that wouldn't carry any weight. I mean, it says clearly that there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and arguments that an application is premature are unlikely to justify a refusal of planning permission other than in the limited circumstances where both the development proposed is substantial or its cumulative effect would be so significant that to grant permission would undermine the plan-making processing that are central to an emerging plan. And then B, the emerging plan is at an advanced stage but is not yet formally part of the development plan for the area. Well, both of these are present. So I sincerely believe that this is a reason why we could refuse this application. Forget about deferring it again, but I think that's, plus the fact that we have 5.6 years of housing on track, I think those two together would be justifiable reasons for refusal at this time.
Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm afraid I actually agree with what my colleague here has just said, and I'm quite prepared to support her in her proposal. I will second that. I am quite agreeable to support my colleague in her proposal, and I'm willing to second her proposal for the refusal on the grounds that she has spoken about. We probably may need more grounds than just that, but it was that has actually drawn my attention to that.
Right, thank you. There is a pause at the present moment, so I'll hang my hat on the thing to say I made the decision that there would be no public speaking. We worked to a set of rules, as you would expect, and if there's been no major change to a deferred item, then I stick by the rule that we won't have public speaking. Otherwise, we lay ourselves open, I think, to any time we have a deferred item. If a few people write in afterwards, we run the risk of opening the whole machine yet again. And so I made the decision, it's on my shoulders, that we won't have any public speaking. Right. Other speakers, please. At the present moment, I have Councillor Everett.
To put some facts behind a potential motion for refusal, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the following things. Firstly, we have a 5-year supply. That is incredibly important. In terms of prematurity arguments, there are all sorts of things around prematurity which are about the circumstances around it rather than the prematurity itself. And the fact that we have a 5-year supply, a robust 5-year supply, is really incredibly important. So that's the first reason I would like to offer as a reason for refusal. The second reason is more to do with the specific prematurity argument, which is that the local plan situation is such that this application, as an application to the local plan rather than the application before us tonight, has the largest amount of objections of anything in the local plan. It is so big that it is the third most important thing that the local plan inspector will need to look at in his local plan inspection. That makes it extremely substantial and, I would argue, central. And I would argue central to the local plan process. So it definitely, in my view, ticks that box. When you look at other areas that have had prematurity arguments used for them, figures usually abound around the numbers in the application and how big they are. The example I always go to is the St Austell judgment, which was Wainholme's appeal in the High Court. And that one had 1,300 houses, which is obviously substantially bigger than this one. However, when you look at 1,300 houses in terms of the size of St Austell, it is comparable to this application to the size of Weeley. The other thing is, I would point out that the number of houses in this application equates to roughly half a year's supply. That is substantial in terms of the local plan, half a year's supply. So all of those issues, I would argue, are things that we should look at as being issues for refusal. But to me, the biggest one, and one that is coming down from central government, any time you ever talk about planning or anything else, the localism agenda is important. It is important that local people take local decisions on local issues. How many times have we heard that phrase, localism? It is absolutely crucial to this application. The whole concept of localism is absolutely fundamental to the process of the local plan process, and if we predetermine that local plan process by passing this application tonight, then we fundamentally put a dagger into the heart of localism. It is really, really important as local representatives that we represent local people. So for me, I have, in my view, a few things there that support the issue of the refusal. I'd be very interested to hear from officers whether they think there is anything else required for us to be able to make a decision on that basis, and whether we are missing anything important.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I've been sort of trying to note down the various issues that members have picked up and how they might form reasons for refusal if that were to be the way that committee were minded to go. And I think what you've described is one issue about the stage of the local plan, the outstanding comments from people that haven't yet been heard. So I think you've described that as a prematurity argument. I'm not sure if I'd use that phrase. I think it's about the you've sort of described that it's not yet proper to give the emerging allocation very much weight, and we should be looking more to the adopted plan. It's too early to give significant weight to the emerging plan, in which case this development would clearly be contrary to the adopted plan. And I think, Councillor Everett raised some interesting points there about having a healthy five-year housing land supply supports that position, because if there was no five-year supply, it would be much harder to make those arguments robustly. So I'm not sure 5-year supply is an argument in itself, but it's a very useful sort of supporting arm to that first issue. And then just to clarify on the second issue, there was about the case that Councillor Everett quoted, and we talked about the scale of development relative to places around it. I think you were describing an issue about the scale of this proposed development relative to the existing village of Weeley. Yeah, okay. I think that's a different issue to the first one about the weight that can be given to the local plan and its progress. I think that was about how appropriate it is to have a scale of development of that size in relation to the village itself. So I think that would form a separate reason. But similarly, as you say, the localism, I think you described it as, but certainly the concerns locally about that issue would sort of play into that reason. So I think I just look for confirmation really whether I've sort of captured the issues. And there would be policies that if we were writing those reasons up in full, that we would pull in to support those reasons for refusal. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, that's me.
Not sure it's working, actually. Would that include, somehow we could bring in what you've just spoken about and what Councillor Everett's spoken about? Would that bring in the fact that we ask people to write in to the planning inspector and they haven't had a chance to actually be read by the planning inspector? That would be included in that, would it? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so that first issue about the weight that can be given to the emerging policy, it would be limited, partly because of the stage that the local plan has progressed to. So it hasn't yet reached that stage of examination that Councillor Heaney was just describing, where people potentially have an opportunity to go to an examination to talk about it. They don't necessarily have the opportunity to appear. It's at the inspector's discretion which issues he deals with in those hearing days, but he would nevertheless certainly have their written comments, and he would look at those and take those into account in coming to his view.
Right, in order, Councillor Everett had a proposal for deferment, but I didn't get a seconder on that. In that case, I have got a proposal now. Councillor Bensalem and Councillor McWilliams seconded. You've heard the terms and conditions, which applies to all of you as well. No further comments from anybody. And then I put it to the vote. Those in favour of a refusal, please show. Of those right, thank you very much. And those against? 1. This application has been refused. Now, my understanding is that a large percentage of you came for the Weeley application. If you would like to leave, I'll have a very short break to allow you to clear the hall. We will make a start. As I said, we've got a lot more items to discuss this evening. So I'm now going to make a start on agenda item 6, which is land adjacent to the rear of 755 St John's Road, Clacton. It's planning application 1701229. This is an outline plan, and Suzanne's got this one. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. This is an outline application which members recall has been before you before, and it's for up to 950 residential units with a neighbourhood centre, site for a new primary school and associated infrastructure. So to remind members of the site, it is located on the western side of Clacton Road and to the north of Jaywick Lane, and this is the indicative master plan.
Sorry, switched off, sorry. I was thinking it was Mistley next. Apologies.
And here is the indicative master plan that was originally approved. So a resolution to grant planning permission subject to Section 106 agreement was given by Planning Committee originally on the 30th of May, and then again on the 21st of August with amendments to the conditions. The resolution given was based on the legal agreement being completed in 6 months from the original resolution, so by the 30th of November 2017. The proposal has not changed in any way, and the reason that it is before members this evening is to request a further 3 months to allow the Section 106 agreement to be completed. Since the previous resolution to grant permission was given, there's been ongoing work to complete the agreement following independent viability testing. However, there's still negotiations to take place on points of legal wording, which means that it will not be agreed within the given time frame. So the recommendation before you this evening is to extend the period of the legal agreement to be completed from the 30th of November 2018 until 1st of March 2019. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We weren't going to take any speakers on this anyhow. It seems to me that if they're all only asking for an extension of time finally to complete the 106, is anybody wishing to speak on that? Yes, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. I've got a question rather than a speech particularly. I noticed that the Highway Authority has revised its conditions. What's the situation with that, please?
Yeah, the highways haven't changed their recommendations since the application was brought before you on the 21st of August. So nothing has changed since what the resolution that was granted on the 21st of August.
So why is it in bold type?
That is just something that was left over from last time. The report has been given as was originally taken.
I think it's a big relief to everybody, then I won't be able to add another condition.
Yes, it's principally, and those are the items on the revision on page 64. Principally, it looks like the alterations to the main road or the B1027 and the various areas feeding into that. So, no further speak. Yes, Councillor McWilliams.
I wasn't going to speak, actually, because I personally think the report's got everything that we need within it, and it would be foolish not to extend it just to get things done properly. So I'm prepared to actually propose that we go ahead with this application.
And right. So it's proposed by Councillor McWilliams and seconded by Councillor Alexander that we accepted the proposal or the recommendation in the report. No further comments. That's the vote then. Those in favour of accepting it, please. That is unanimous. That is accepted in that case. That is approved. Right. Thank you very much. Now we move on to item A3. It's page 91 of your agenda. This is land to the south of Long Road and to the west of Clacton Road, Mistley and... Right. So a site that we know quite well. So I'll turn to Suzanne again for this one. Thank you.
Thank you. So before I start, just to draw members' attention to the update sheet, which contains additional objections received, including those from Councillor Baker and Bradford and Lawford Parish Council. There is also an updated recommendation with regards to affordable housing requirements, and it also outlines corrections within the officer report. So this application is an outline application. It's an outline application with all matters reserved other than strategic access points, and it's for the erection of 485 dwellings, 2 hectares of employment land, which included uses A2, A3, B1, B2 and D1 uses, and with public open space and associated infrastructure. When the application was first received, it was originally for 500 dwellings, but that has been reduced during the lifetime of the application to 485. So members will be familiar with the site due to the planning history, which I'll go through in this presentation. So the site is to the south of Long Road. So you've got Long Road in this location, and to the west of Clacton Road. And along the southern boundary lies Dead Lane, and the land to the west has permission for mixed-use development. So this shows the application site in this area here. It comprises of approximately 23 hectares of arable agricultural land, and as you can see, it's roughly square, rectangular in shape. So here are some photographs of the site. So that's views west looking towards Lawford. And that is views across the application site. And again, that shows the application site just as an arable field. And that is views looking in the opposite direction, so towards Clacton Road. And you can see the buildings of the care home and other associated buildings adjacent to the site. And that is a photograph from Dead Lane with the application site in this area. So in terms of the allocation of the site, in the local plan as shown on the left of your screen, it's not allocated within the adopted local plan, and it lies outside the settlement development boundary with no specific allocation. However, if you look within the emerging plan on the right of your screen, you'll see that the site is in this area, and it covers a couple of allocations. So it's wholly within the development boundary, and the south-east corner, the sort of pink-purple colour, is allocated for employment purposes, and the northern part of the site adjacent to Long Road is allocated as Green Gap. The indicative layout plans I'll get onto, but the proposal retains the Green Gap and the employment uses. So therefore, as it's within the settlement boundary, it's considered that there's no principal objection to development on this site. So just to remind members of the planning history, so there was an outline planning permission which was granted for 300 dwellings under the original 2015 application. So this is the master plan which was approved at that stage. It was an outline application, so this was indicative, but that was what was given as to show how the site could be developed for 300 dwellings. At this stage, it was also accompanied by a parameter plan, which shows the different potential storey heights of buildings. And at that stage, it was proposed that the majority of the site would be 2-storey, which is shown in the orange, with a small area of 1 to 2 storeys in yellow and a small area of 2.5 storey within the centre of the site. So that was an application that was approved. Following that approval, a consent to vary a condition of the parameter plans was refused. And the proposed changes as part of that application was to reduce the overall amount of open space, enlarge the areas on which homes will be built, so the residential areas, apply a height limit across the whole of the site for 2.5 storeys, and change the position of the employment land. So originally it was in this area, and it was proposed to relocate it to the other side of the application site. It was also proposed to move the access point further along Clacton Road to the north. This application was refused by members of the Planning Committee, and if I quote some of that reason for refusal, and that was on the basis that the substantial boundary and integral landscaping, as well as the sensitive use of varied heights, will be necessary to produce a development that blend in with the landscape in scale, colour and design, and address the juxtaposition of the built development with the local landscape character of its exposed rural setting, and that the landscape and building height parameters plan would fail to ensure that the development would protect the district's landscape as required by various policies. And reference was also made to the original outline permission, And so overall it was felt that the proposed changes were not acceptable, and for those reasons the application was refused. So moving on, in relation to that reason for refusal, a further application to vary the same condition was submitted, and that proposed a nominal reduction in the overall amount of open space, a nominal enlargement to the approved development area, redistribution of the approved height limits across the site to include buildings between 1 and 2.5 storey, a relocation of the approved employment land as previously, and the approved access point on Clacton Road moved as previously. So this was that application, and members approved that application in June 2018, and it was still subject to the same requirements as the original outline application in terms of the conditions and the contributions, legal agreement, etc. So this shows what is the latest extant permission, and that is the approved landscaping plan and the approved building heights. So where members were previously concerned about 2.5 storey throughout the entire site, this approved application was amended so you had potentially 2.5 storeys within the centre of the site, as shown by the dark pink colour. So more planning history, I'm afraid. So on the basis of that approved outline, which we've just gone through, a reserved matters application was submitted for phase 1 of the development, and that is what is shown there and what was approved by members in June 2018. So in terms of, as a summary of that, the site has an outline permission for 300 dwellings, and a detailed permission for phase 1 of the development. So there's an extant permission for 300 dwellings on the application site, in accordance with the latest parameter plans that have been shown. So moving on to the proposal. So this application differs from the previously or the most recently approved application for a few reasons. So most significantly is the number of proposed dwellings has increased from 300 to 485. It is proposed that B2 uses be included and that B8 uses be including, and that is predominantly within the employment area to give flexibility to the likely uses of the site. And the level of landscaping has been reduced around the boundary, particularly members may know in this area here and to this area in that area.
Sorry, excuse me, did someone own the Jaguar after the games? New Jaguar?
Mine? It's not yours. Right, let's move on. Sorry, that interruption has upset the line of thought, but yeah, please, Suzanne, sorry about that.
So I think I covered the landscaping issue. So the landscaping has been amended, particularly in 2 locations, this location here and along this boundary here. Also, as part of the proposal, there's 2 an access and egress point proposed by for the commercial units out onto Dead Lane, and some additional highway works in relation to that. So previously, when the application was approved, the commercial area didn't have a separate access, and that is now proposed as part of this application. So in terms of the proposed density plan, it's a view of a basis of a higher density sort of within the centre of the site, extending out towards the edges of the site, and that is an indicative landscape parameter plan. It doesn't show the exact details of the proposed landscaping, but it's parameters which would be followed. And again, in terms of height, that has been amended, still retaining the 1 to 2 storey height across the majority of the site, but there's areas that potentially between 1 and 2.5 stories in the area of dark pink. And that shows an illustrative plan of how the site could be developed. And in terms of the highway works, Essex County Council have been consulted on the application and have no objections to the proposal, subject to the conditions that are set out in the report. And one of those, which was the same as the previous application, was improvement to Cox's Roundabout. So that retains the same as previously approved. Also, in terms of these are the details of the access into Long Road, and that is as was previously approved by members in previous applications. And again, this is the Clacton Road access, so it was moved further northward as part of a variation, and it is proposed to be retained in that location. And moving on to which is the significant difference between the application, is that there's proposed to be employment access from Dead Lane, which is this location here, and as part of that it is proposed that the in the green sort of yellow that the carriageway be widened to give the capacity to deal with the increase in traffic. So in summary, the principle of residential development is considered acceptable in this location, as it's within the settlement development boundary of the emerging plan, has an extant permission, and the parameter plans show that the allocation of green gap and employment designation in the emerging local plan are retained. Whilst the application is outline form, officers are content that subject to the reasonable planning conditions and the legal obligation, that the general principle of this level of development on the site is acceptable, and therefore the recommendation is for approval.
Right, thank you very much. We have now some public speaking. So I'm going to call on Councillor Frances Fairhall, if she is here. Yes. Right, Councillor Fairhall, as you appreciate that you have 3 minutes, and get yourself settled, and we'll start from there.
Right. I'm a long-stand member of Mistley Parish Council. Incidentally, I think on your papers it suggests that this site is in Lawford, but it isn't, it's in Mistley. At Mistley, we're appalled by this application, and equally that TDC planners are prepared to support it. It makes us feel that we have been badly let down by our local council. The past, I know, is history, but in an unusual planning application procedure, that was for 1500761 out in 2016, permission was given to develop 300 houses on this site. On this occasion, pressure from the applicants meant there was no substantial debate, either by this committee or by Mistley residents and the parish council, before the application went to the planning inspector. If members don't know or remember this occurrence, they should ask the planning department for the story. Now we have a situation when permission is sought to build nearly 485 houses on this site that was previously never designated for housing development, but which has possibly become so because of the earlier successful application. The size of the development now before you means a population increase of probably half the present population of Mistley, at least 1,000 extra cars on already congested roads, heavy pressure on other infrastructure is envisaged for Mistley on open farmland standing above the rest of the parish, and overwhelming an existing residential area of Mistley and the small area of Manningtree, the small town of Manningtree. As I understand it, each application is considered on its merits without consideration of the overall effects on the bigger picture. This is ridiculous in a small rural area like Mistley, Manningtree and Lawford. Mistley is being overwhelmed by new housing being built or in the planning pipeline. The north-east boundaries of this current application are at a busy junction where 5 roads meet. 2 of these will be affected at the junction by a further development of 60-plus houses, and an application for another 65 houses is shortly to be considered by TDC for a site directly opposite tonight's application site, also affecting this junction and roads leading off it. An increase of another 200 houses at this point is excessive, unnecessary and unsustainable. Increasing the housing numbers to nearly 500 on the applicant's site would have the effect of creating a separate settlement out of all proportion to the existing village of Mistley. It is unfair and does not reflect any need not already being met. Already there is significant traffic congestion in the area and beyond. A traffic study from 2014 has not been updated, despite obviously increases in traffic, and the impact on Long Road, Trinity Road, Brook Street, High Street and the station approach. We know houses are needed, but they do not need to be built on this scale to cause such disruption to an existing stable community and destroy the historic character of Mistley. To use the favoured word sustainable, what is sustainable about this? Tendering can now show a sufficient supply of housing for the next 5 years. We do not need an increase in this development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on the ward member, Councillor Colne.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, I wish to object to this application. The applicant has already obtained planning consent, despite local opposition, to build 300 dwellings on this parcel of agricultural land. This application seeks to increase that number of dwellings by approximately 60%. The applicants in their design and access statement quote policy in the saved local plan. They state that limited development consistent with local community needs will be permitted. A 60% increase in the number already approved can never be considered as limited, and no community need is identified. The 3 parishes community of Lawford, Manningtree and Mistley is a recognised community in its own right and classified as a smaller urban settlement in the local plan. In our community, there are currently developments already in some progress of construction, creating over 700 new dwellings. Additionally, there are approved permissions for another 430 new homes. There are currently planning applications in various stages for around another 400 dwellings. Just the approved applications and developments under construction guarantee that approximately 1,200 new homes will be built in our community in the next few years. This represents an increase in the local population of between 35 and 40%. In addition, our community is located on the Suffolk border. The approved developments in neighbouring South Suffolk villages will result in approximately 400 new homes, 300 of which will be nearer in location to Manningtree Railway Station than the dwellings proposed in this application. This increasing population in South Suffolk will use the meagre facilities and services provided in our community. So this application to build yet another 185 dwellings is not consistent with our local community needs. Historically, this community could be said to have had sustainability. After all, we have a mainline railway station, schools, 2 GP surgeries, a few shops and limited employment. However, that well of sustainability has already run dry. The approaches to the railway station are gridlocked for hours each day. The trains and the car park are already full. There are currently no seats available on commuter trains and nowhere additionally to park cars at or around our railway station. It is recognised that all forms of school provision in our area will be seriously inadequate for the number of already approved increases in housing. Our secondary school has no sixth form and all our children currently for post-GCSE education have to be bused to other towns. The GP surgeries sound grand, but they consist of a converted bungalow and a temporary building in a supermarket car park. Neither has the capacity to expand due to their location. The CCG has not identified any alternative site to invest in GP services. In addition, surgeries outside our area are now refusing new patients and advising them to try ours. Whilst planning approvals can commit developers to contribute relatively small sums towards transport improvements, health provision, education, this cash does not magically transform itself into new schools, GP surgeries, a new railway station car park, better roads and places to work. My point is that we had only one well of sustainability, and the existing developments and approved developments have run that well totally dry. Our limited services, facilities and our roads cannot cope with a further 185 homes built on an unsustainable site without its own services and a diminishing area of recreational space. We are told in the application that 2 hectares will be made available as employment land. However, the details are conveniently not contained in the application. The details are only made known only in reserved matters, only after this application is granted. Bearing in mind the remoteness of this location, I find it hard to believe that employment opportunities sufficient to occupy potentially over 1,000 new adults of working age will be available within this site. Therefore, the overwhelming majority of these new residents will be travelling by motor vehicles to work, to schools, to shops, to recreation. The approved application already flies in the face of sustainability, and additional 185 dwellings further exacerbates this. Lastly, the applicants have stated that TDC cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. Therefore, paragraph 14 of the MPPF is engaged. We have in excess of a 6.2-year land supply, which has been confirmed by inspectors in recent appeal decisions. Therefore, paragraph 14 is not engaged and the presumption in favour of sustainable development is not made out. Please refuse this application.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Now, Councillor in the adjacent ward would be Councillor Baker, who, as we know, is away. He has sent some notes, and I've asked Councillor Turner if there's anything that he wishes to add to Councillor Coley's report, and if he'd like to come forward and take us through the additional points.
Thank you, Chairman. I was hoping to substitute it for Councillor Baker, but my legs decided otherwise this morning, so I shall be reading from some notes he sent to me. Although this proposed development is in Mistley, it is likely to have a greater effect on the residents in Lawford due to the nearest primary school being located there, the only secondary school being located there, as well as the nearest doctor's surgery. There will be no doubt will be significant impact on the already huge numbers of vehicles using Long Road to access the A137 into Colchester or Cox's Hill to travel north, using the railway station crossing at Manningtree Station towards Ipswich and beyond. The roads are already extremely busy, and further development will add to the 700 to 950 vehicles using Wignall Street eastbound in the AM peak, and the 940 to 1,080 vehicles using Long Road westbound in the AM peak, plus the 1,027 to 1,100 vehicles using Cox's Hills in the AM peak. These figures have been taken from the data supplied from the vehicle-activated sign and owned and operated by Lawford Parish Council at various locations within the parish. Within the vision and objectives of Tendring District Council's emerging local plan, it is stated within the vision the rural heartland, in the district's rural heartland, the smaller towns of Manningtree, Lawford, Mistley and Brightlingsea, along with the larger villages, will have seen some modest level of housing. The Strategic Housing Availability Assessment for tendering in April 2018 stated smaller urban settlements, the Manningtree, Lawford and Mistley area, are expected to accommodate more than 1,000 homes, which represents a considerable increase in the settlement's housing stock and reflects the area's popularity, its attractiveness, environment and the good mainline rail links. The vast majority of the development has already been obtained and is expected to deliver over the next 1 to 10 years. The average rate of development over the plan period would be around 70 completions a year. Historic rates of development would suggest this is achievable. The previous document, latest SHLAA for tendering, published in November 17, used exactly the same wording. However, the figure for 1,100 homes was stated. Mistley is classed, along with Lawford and Manningtree, as a small urban settlement in the emerging local plan. Mistley had a total of 1,279 homes in 2014, and since then, 714 homes have been granted planning permission, an increase of 55%. The figure takes into account the 300 homes already approved on this site. If one takes the figure used by the National Health Service in their response to being consulted of possibly 1,100 residents, which equates to 2.27 residents per property, for this development, then houses 714 already approved will provide a minimum increase in population of 1,620. No doubt the figure was supplied by the applicant. If one adds the extra 185 houses, which would equate to 420 residents, there will be a minimum increase in population of 2,040. The population in Mistley in 2011 was stated at 2,685. As this figure is now some 7 years old, it cannot be taken as accurate or a definitive figure at the current time. However, if one takes the 1,620, which as stated above should be a minimum, the population will have increased by 60%. Taking the figure of my additional 420 persons, this would mean a total of 2,040 residents. And if this application were to be approved, then the population will increase by 76%. However, it isn't obvious that not all the dwellings will have the small amount of residents, as there have been larger properties such as 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses. So what I've stated will probably be higher. Under paragraph 5, healthcare needs arising from the proposed development, NHS England stated the development would give rise to need for improvements to capacity in line with the emerging CCG estate strategy by way of an extension, reconfiguration, refurbishment of potential relocation for the benefit of patients in Lawford surgery, a proportion of the cost of which would be met by the developer. There is then calculated the developer contribution to mitigate proposals, this being £173,000 plus. Lawford surgery is situated at the beginning of a residential street in a bungalow surrounded by other bungalows and a small number of houses to the northeast and a very small car park which accommodates at most 8 vehicles. It is considered that the property is unable to be extended at all due to its size and location, and potential demand on this particular GP practice had not been properly recognised by the NHS England, nor by the developer or other developments, with Lawford alone. Some, such as Summers Park, 150 homes, and Lawford Green, 360. There is also a potential impact from the homes being proposed to be built in Brantham, which fall within the catchment area of the Lawford surgery. I'm nearly finished, Mr. Chairman. It is considered now, without any more developments, that this area is unsustainable, and more demands being placed on the services and amenities increasing at a rapid rate. A minimum increase in population of 76% cannot be said to be modest. It must be, at the very least, said to be extremely substantial. It is for the above reasons I ask you to not accept the officer's recommendation for approval, but to refuse this application. If I may, I spoke on behalf of Councillor Andy Baker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers.
Right, and now call Mr. Sam Brampton from Sitting Country, who's the agent for this site. Welcome, sir. Unfortunately, although ward councillors get 5 minutes, you only get 3, so...
Hopefully I won't need them.
Right.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sam Bampton and I represent City and Country, who are working with the applicant to deliver new homes on the site. Having reviewed the officer's report, I wholeheartedly support its conclusions and I will not try to repeat its contents. Also, I would like to thank officers for their hard work and the constructive input that has helped ensure the scheme is of the highest quality. This has directly led to a reduction in the total number of houses and the introduction of a circular walk around the perimeter of the site. This will provide a high-quality recreation space for existing and future residents of the area. Just before I continue, I'd like to cover off some of the points raised by speakers. In terms of cumulative impact on the wider area, this has been considered by the statutory consultees, and they have concluded that, subject to the Section 106 contributions we will be making, which will be in the millions, will be able to address issues with highways, schools and doctor's surgery. I'd also like to confirm that the approved reserve matters for Phase 1 includes a convenience store in terms of providing local services. I think that's something the committee themselves made a point of us including. And turning to the doctor's surgery, I don't want to get anyone too excited about it, but the NHS have identified our site as suitable because it has a D1 consent, and we are in early negotiations with them about potentially providing a doctor's surgery, which would fall within the existing outline consent. Turning to my main points, the site has already been earmarked for development and benefits from outline consent for 300 units and 2 hectares of employment land. The residential portion of the site is 21.4 hectares, equivalent to a density of just 13 dwellings per hectare, which is extremely low and is a very inefficient use of land. We live on an island where land is scarce. We cannot produce enough food and it is acknowledged that we need to release greenfield land to build much-needed homes. It is their imperative that if we are to truly deliver sustainable development, that we make efficient use of land that has already been allocated for development, which in turn will reduce pressures for further greenfield release elsewhere in the district. The landscape master plan submitted with the application shows that 485 new homes can be delivered on the site, including substantial landscape features and 20% open space, which is twice what is required by policy. The gross density of the revised proposal would be 23 dwellings per hectare, which is still a low density respecting its location on the edge of Mistley. To put this density in context, the work carried out for the current local plan review assumes gross densities will be a minimum of 30 dwellings per hectare. Increasing the number of homes on the site will change the mix slightly, with the inclusion of more smaller family homes, and will provide for the needs of the local area. It will also provide an additional 56 affordable homes that will be available for local people, for which there is an acknowledged and unaddressed need. In summary, the revised proposal will make more efficient use of a site already allocated for development. It will also provide additional affordable homes, school contributions, and will secure highway improvements in the wider area. The scheme therefore represents sustainable development in a form that will help Tyndering meet its needs for this and future generations. Thank you very much for your time. I hope my comments have been of assistance to you, and I look forward to listening to your discussion.
Yes, Chair. Just on one of the points with regards to the fact that we've got a 5-year housing supply. I mean, that is not in dispute. To be fair to the applicants, the application was submitted some time ago and probably at a stage when we didn't have a 5-year housing supply. But as members are aware, this situation has changed. However, in terms of this determination of this application, as the site is situated within the settlement boundary, the fact we have a 5-year housing supply is not a determining issue for this application.
Sorry, didn't have the mic on. It's open to the councillors now.
Well, if nobody's coming forward, I'll come forward, Johnny. I've got something to say.
Right. Anybody? No? Nobody wishes to speak? Then Councillor Heaney.
I'm pleased that you've left that up, because never before have I seen verges used as part of the open space. And they can't be green because all over by those roads, there will be drives crossing them. So I find that rather mysterious. And if you go to pages, we go to pages 100 and 101. I'll just read this out. However, the detailed layout plan does not reflect the extent of the green corridor spaces and general level of planting showed on the amended master plan. In particular, the main spine roads and smaller link roads are shown as green on the amended landscape master plan, but do not appear to have any planting shown on the detailed layout plan. For clarity and avoid misunderstanding and confusion, the information shown on the two plans should be amended so both are reflect the reality of the development proposal. But I can't see any reality on either side of the road. These are just going to be drives. And I don't think they should be put in green at all, because it suggests they're part of the whatever the amount of open space. Well, verges are not open space. I've got quite a few problems with this development, but I'm sure that I'll come on to that later if anybody else wishes to speak.
Councillor Minison, I'll just add at this stage, just to remind councillors that we are looking at an outline application with all matters reserved other than the access points and effectively the numbers, 485, that we're up from 300. So, Councillor Benison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was pleased to see that up there, but I'd also like to see the proposed layout. I know we're not considering that at the moment, but in relation to the, it's this one, in relation to that landscaping, yes, that one. And it seems that illustrative layout plan, there's no green amenity area at all, apart from the bit at the top. And perhaps I'm a bit cynical, but I wonder why, within a couple of months of us approving 300 homes, the developer immediately comes back with an extra 185 when we'd already agreed the 300 with amenity spaces, enough space for amenity, for them to then come back immediately for an extra 185. Would we be setting a precedent if we approve this so that any developer could then say, oh, it's okay, we just apply for a few houses on land, and once we've got permission, we can increase the number of houses?
Right. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. If I remember rightly, when we had this before us before, we discussed that it was kind of, I think it was insinuated that it was virtually borderline sustainable. It now leads me to believe that the extra buildings would possibly tip the balance, and I'm afraid I kind of agree with a lot of remarks that have been made by Councillor Nick Turner and Councillor Colne. I think it may be a step too far. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Brown. Other speakers? Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I agree with the speakers. I agree with them entirely. Here we have an application before us of 300 houses approved, and they're asking us to look at 185. I have no problem with the access, although I am a little concerned why you would want to go into Dead Lane, considering that it's almost a single track that leads into farmyards and all kinds of clever things, and it's in very poor condition. However, I don't have an objection to that. But the application, as I see it, is quite a good application. But once again, it's stuck in the middle there with nothing at all around it. The railway station is at saturation point. It can't take any more. And if you like to cross the bridge and walk down, you'll find that cars who are going to the railway station are parked all across verges, etc., running into Suffolk. Shops, there's no shopping facility there at all. The high street is a mixture of hobgoblin type stores, very nice for localised kind of existence, but 485 homes for a convenience store and some recreational area. No, I think the design of this is not in keeping with what we would expect from any application. So I'm in favour, very much in favour of the accesses. Now, I don't see any problems with that at all. You've got to get in and out. I wasn't in favour of the 300 houses, as you know. To me, that was excessive for then. I think this has just gone 485, it's gone just too far, and I am not in favour of it at all.
Thank you. Other speakers? Yes, Councillor Everett.
Thank you. Just a few questions to get a few figures correct in my head. When we were looking at the 300 house application, what were the numbers of affordable homes and gifted units, the primary and secondary school education contributions, the health contribution, and the off-site management contributions, please? Have they been uprated by roughly, well, I suppose about 60%, isn't it, from what they were in the original application, please? I suggest somebody else has another go while...
I was just going to say, while we're searching for those, are there any other speakers?
I'll come back.
Yes, Councillor McWilliams.
I just want to make a comment, actually, Chairman. I seem to remember when we discussed the 2.5 stories, we went into great detail over them, over and over and over again. In fact, it amazed me how long it took us to talk about them. And we came to, we were fully acceptive of what the Tendring Farms or City and Country, whichever one, what they agreed to put up on the map. Now we see that we've got just pink blobs in different places. Whether that's right, wrong or indifferent, it just doesn't look right after all the discussion that we had over that. Can I just ask as well, it rather intriguing me, why hasn't Anglian Water come back? Is there some specific reason? And also, I too am concerned about the contributions that have been paying. I know that the CCG do put down the actual amount that they require, which is rather, I think, in a small amount, but the contribution towards the problems that there are at the railway station seems so insignificant that it's unbelievable. But it's just a comment I just wish to make at this stage.
I'll come back at the minute.
Yeah, Councillor Haney.
I mean, if we're going to talk about things that are going to be done to help this development, slicing off 2 bits of grass on the northern side of the roundabout, it's not going to make any difference. I frequently use that roundabout. You can't have 2 cars going out at once on the roundabout. It just won't work. It'll be just the same as it is before with a slightly larger roundabout. I just think this is a really... I mean, I know it's all going to be discussed and blah, 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 and this is not what they're going to do, but this seems an incredibly urbanising development on the edge of a town. And if you go on to the next bit of Mistley, that's where the sort of all the large houses of Mistley are. It's totally inappropriate that it should be so overbuilt, in my view, so near the sort of smart, large garden bits of Mistley, which just literally start at the top of the right-hand corner there and go down the hill. It just doesn't seem to fit in at all on the edge of a rural village. This will be looking over fields, and it's like it looks like the middle of a town to me. And again, we've got the 1.5 story or 3 story. I read that they want 3 story in this development now. Well, there's obviously going to be blocks of flats, I suppose. I know they say, and the other point is, on one of the slides I saw, that green bit on the right, which is obviously not tremendously large, because it doesn't seem much larger than some of the houses, maybe the width of 2 houses, is going to be full of ponds anyway, or soakaways. It's right, I don't know if they're ponds for the whole time, or just soakaways in the winter. That could go on the road, because that is the beginning of where the hill goes down. I mean, that side, I suspect, although I can't say, is slightly lower than the other side of the site. Can we go back to the slide with the ponds? That one, you see, these are, I don't know if they're permanent ponds or they're dips in the ground, or they're going to fill up with surface water in the winter. I mean, that really does seem to cut down the green space. They talk about a footpath round the side, but in the winter they'll be plodding through the ponds if they wanted to go on a dog walk. I just don't feel at all happy with this. I know we didn't want it in the first place, and it was passed on by the planning inspector, but their first plan was so much better, more attractive and in keeping, and now they're trying to force more and more urban development onto this site, which just is totally inappropriate in my view. Thank you.
Right. Got some answers for... All right.
Right, so I'll try and pick up on some of the issues that have been raised. The first one in terms of amenity space and green space. In fact, this slide shows the sort of amenity space. There will be amenity space around the edge of the site. It's an outline application. This is a parameter plan, but the expectation is that this will be green space that is available for a circular dog walk, and it wouldn't be intercepted with driveways or anything like that. It's expected that they would come from within the site. You've also got reference made to the open space just being within the outside. You have also got an area within the centre of the site. And in terms of the open space, we have a policy which states that 10% of the site should be open space, and the proposal is in excess of, I think it's about, sort of 20% of the site is open space. So in terms of that, is in excess of our policy requirements. There have been various comments about the sustainability of the site. Just to remind you that it has got consent for 300 dwellings, and it is within the draft settlement boundary. So it wouldn't have been included within the draft settlement boundary if officers didn't consider it was an acceptable site. And as referred to in public speaking, there is a need to make best use of the land. So it's a balance between how members feel that the proposal impacts the character of the area, I suppose, in terms of that density. And coming on to the section 106 contributions, please bear with me because I need to go through the original legal agreement and make sure I read out the numbers right. So in terms of the on-site affordable housing, if I do them in the order that they're set out in the recommendation, previously as part of the 300 dwellings, 18 gifted units were proposed. And this is the element that's changed on the update sheet. So it is still proposed to seek the 18 gifted units in respect of the 300 dwellings for the site. But in terms of the uplift, it is proposed to seek 30% of affordable homes of that uplift. So the recommendation is for the 18 gifted units and further 55 affordable homes, which accords with the policy of the uplift for the remaining properties. In terms of the education contribution, the amounts proposed as this part of this application are set out in the report. They have been amended in terms of the 300 dwellings and are significantly greater. Don't know if members want the exact figures for that. No, okay. And in terms of the health contribution, again, that has been increased in line with the increase in number of dwellings. The one that remains the same is the contribution towards off-site traffic management and measures for the A137 railway crossing. So Essex County Council were consulted on this application and did request the same amount. My understanding is at the time of the original application there were other applications, and that the cost was split between the applications. The reason it hasn't increased is that the works that need to be done do not increase by the number of dwellings that are being created.
Yes.
I think that
Councillor
raises
Everett.
a question.
Thank you for that. I need a little bit of clarity on affordable housing, because you said that it had been calculated on the uplift number, not on the total, but we're looking at a total of 485, not an uplift of whatever that would be, 185. So if we were talking about 30% of 485, that would be 145 homes. So I'm not quite sure that these figures add up vaguely sensibly. And I think we need to get our heads around this, because affordable housing is definitely an issue we need to have cognizance of. And I'm not sure that we're getting enough for our affordable housing out of what's been proposed. But that's a question mark in my mind rather than an absolute statement, if you see what I mean. However, on the on off-site traffic management measures for the railway crossing, what you said, and I have no doubt that Essex County Council said it, doesn't make sense. We should be seeking more for a larger number of houses. There are going to be a larger number of houses here, creating more of a problem on the railway crossing. It's a bad enough issue now. We have the opportunity to perhaps add a little bit more to that 16,000. So I'd like your advice, really, on both of those two issues, please.
Okay, in terms of the affordable housing, obviously you're correct. If you're seeking the policy requirements in light of this application, it would be significantly more. I suppose the reason behind the officer's recommendation is that they've got an extant permission for 300 dwellings, which could be built out, well, not built out tomorrow, but it could be implemented. They've got an outline consent for phase 1, so potentially that application is extant and could be implemented. And for that, we've got, as part of the previous agreement, 18 gifted units. So it comes down to the amount of weight you wish to give that extant permission. And in terms of the highway issue, as part of the previous application, there is works to increase the capacity of the junctions. So once that capacity is increased, it potentially would give greater capacity than the 300 dwellings approved as part of the previous application. So the actual works that are required to increase the capacity cost the same regardless of the number of dwellings, and it's my understanding that those works would allow for the additional or capacity for the additional 185 dwellings proposed as part of this application.
Could we, if we were so minded, change the figure ourselves?
Sorry, the figure for the highway contributions.
Well, the for the railway crossing.
I think that figure is obviously based on analysis of the work that needed to be undertaken and was split between the other development sites. So I think without that information of what works need to be undertaken for this specific application, it wouldn't be reasonable for that figure to be amended here tonight without that information to back it up.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Right. Other speakers? Other speakers? No? Put in my...
Richard waving at you. He was just Richard.
Okay.
Got another one to throw into the mix,
right.
Just because it could be thrown into the mix, really. Sorry, I'll say that again. I'll throw this into the mix because it is something that can be thrown into the mix. We've had discussions elsewhere in this committee about conditions, if we were minded to approve this, and that obviously is still an if, about possibilities of conditions around things like dust suppression, which I notice isn't on the list of conditions here, and road repairs after damage being done to roads, which was particularly a problem in Frinton, as I remember it. I'd like to sort of add into the mix, because I think it is a recycling good thing to think about, which is whether we should put a condition on there about EV points, electric vehicle points, charging points to be put in garages or on properties. But I don't know whether that's just me being fanciful about sort of ideas that I have.
I'll put in my two penneth. As far as I'm concerned, I don't like the increase of 185 properties. It's as simple as that. We had nearly a split vote on the 300 before, and now we are looking at a further 60-70% on the figure that we were struggling to find the first time round. The points that my Vice Chairman has made, when you look at this landscape, all that supposed green land in times of stress can be ponds or lakes. I don't like that. I'm not so keen, and this is really what we're talking about. I keep reminding you that tonight we are talking about the numbers and we're talking about the exits. We have seen the dead lane, how narrow that dead lane is. Having said that, this proposal actually calls for the industrial area in a specific place, and I think that's possibly right. But I don't like the exit into that very narrow lane. So there are one or two things that I don't like. As far as principally, I think, if I really get down to it, it's the numbers. 300, just about, 485, no, I'm personally against it. I think it's too much, it's overdevelopment on that particular site. Right, there must be some other people who wish to speak. No, in that case, do I have some sort of proposal?
Suzanne might come back.
Please, yes.
Yeah, just trying to summarise sort of the debate. So just in regard to Councillor Everett's queries, the dust suppression would be covered by condition 10. Yeah. In terms of the electric charging points, that is something that would be dealt with by the Reserve Matters application. And reference has been made to the exits onto Dead Lane, and Dead Lane being a narrow road. I appreciate it's a narrow road, but just to remind members that part of this proposal there is a widening scheme proposed to that road. In terms of the discussion, it's clear that members have concerns with regard to the number or the increase in number of dwellings. I mean, that they are reasonable concerns given the proposal and the character of the area, but I think there needs to be more thought. Okay, there is an increase in number of dwellings, but it is a site that's within the settlement boundary. So you just need to make it clear what is the harm that is caused by that increase in number of dwellings. And I suppose there were the issues that were potentially touched on the refusal of the first variation of condition.
Right. Proposals from anybody or further discussions? We've heard from local councillors on the stress that it will cause the other services, medical and various other ones, from Councillor Baker and Councillor Colne. To see Councillor Everett.
I'd like to propose refusal of this application on overdevelopment grounds. There is no need for the extra houses in our local plan. We have a robust 5+ year supply. I think that ought to do it.
Right, I think Councillor Brown was in for second. Well, he was up to speak, sorry, yes.
Seconding.
Right, okay. Councillor Heaney?
Could we add the urbanisation again with the 3 stories? Can that be included in the overdevelopment? I think 3 stories, which I'm sure I read in the agenda, is just too much on the edge of this rather rural village. And it certainly will be backing onto green fields. The other side goes on to Acorn Village, a large area of open land. And then it's out of keeping with the rest of Mistley, which starts to go down the hill. I don't know if that's a point can be made. And I just think the site is overdeveloped. I know it's only 21 houses per hectare, but they're asking for 3 stories and 2.5 stories, which is quite wrong in this area, I think.
Right. Councillor McWilliams?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I did make a note. I mean, there's harm and there's sustainability was mentioned, wasn't it, by some of those. I don't know how that would... An impact, obviously, as well. That was just 1 or 2 things, and I don't know how Suzanne would fit that in.
All right. Councillor Bennison?
Thank you, Mr Chairman. There's also the case that... I mean, Richard has spoken about the overdevelopment in a rural area, but there's also insufficient amenity area, in my view, as SUDs have to be included in that open space. The perimeter has been described as a dog walking area, so that means there's a tiny little patch in the middle for children to play. And if you add the SUDs ponds in around the perimeter, presumably, that will diminish the amount of amenity area as well. Thank you.
Right.
Can we mention the SUDs areas are right on the side of the road?
Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Heaney?
I was just going to mention, in the plan, I know this isn't the end layout, etc., but the SUDs ponds seem to be against the main road, which is an area I think is slightly lower, and I don't think that's a very good idea. And there also seems little amenity area for children. OK, there's a dog walking patch around the middle. The bit in the middle will be another dog walking patch, and we know what people are like about picking up after their dogs. And the front bit near the road, obviously children, that cannot be a children's play area on that busy road.
Right. Any further points? If not, I'm going to ask Suzanne if she's got any, and if we were mindful of refusing it, whether there's anything that we've suggested so far that would be contrary to her recommendation.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So if I go through the reasons that I've picked up through the discussion, one is overdevelopment of the site. I think as it's within the settlement boundary, it's an outline permission. We've got no evidence that it is potentially overdevelopment of the site. In terms of the 5-year housing supply, again, it was within the settlement boundary, so that's not a determining factor. In terms of the height of the buildings, just refer you back to the approved plan, which does give permission for 1 to 2.5 stories within the centre of the site. The proposal is, again, for 2.5 stories within 3 centres of the site. So I would urge members to go against a reason for refusal in terms of 2.5 storey, as that is what has already been approved. And in terms of the amenity area, again, as mentioned before, that is in excess of what's required by our policies. Although having said all that, these all sort of are specific issues which link into the issue that potentially members feel that the proposal for 485 dwellings is out of character with the surrounding area, and that increase in density would result in harm to the landscape character. So my advice would be, if members were minded to refuse the application, is that they focus on the increase in density being out of character with the surrounding area and harming the landscape impact, rather than specific issues raised.
Councillor White said I could ask a question. The question was, I obviously read the agenda wrong. I obviously read that there were going to be 3 stories in here. Is that wrong? I probably read it was 3 different places of 2.5 stories, and they're not 3-storey houses. Sorry, it's my lack of understanding. Thank you.
Right. Any further points, Councillor Everett?
Can I just bring one possible other thing into that list, which I'd like to comment on, which is about the fact that we normally seek 30% affordable housing, and this goes nowhere near to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
If members feel it's necessary, you can add that as a reason for refusal as not being policy compliant.
Right.
Well done, Richard.
I'm going to call for a vote on it now. There's no further points. So it's proposed and seconded that we refuse this application along the points we've just been discussing. Those in favour of refusal, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. That application is refused. And now we move to planning application agenda item 8, which is planning application 1801230. This is a full application for 55 Colne Point, Clear Bay, St Osyth. And yes, I'm losing Richard because he's just declared an interest. So we'll see this one through and then we'll have a break, I would suggest. So I'm going to turn to Head of Planning now for this one. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this planning application is an application to vary conditions on a planning permission to allow unrestricted all year round occupation on a chalet located at Colne Point, Clear Bay. So there's a plan showing you the application site. It's a little bit faint, but members will have visited it and be familiar with its location. And actually that's clearer, isn't it, the aerial photograph showing it in that chalet style development. And there's the property itself. Okay, so at present, occupation on this particular property is permitted between the is not permitted between the 1st of November and the end of February the following year, except at weekends and during a 10-day period starting on Christmas Day. And this condition was imposed when a planning appeal was heard back in 1990. So the application is situated on Colne at Point Clear. It forms part of quite a large chalet estate, mostly constructed in the early 1960s. The chalets, when they were built, were intended for leisure use, but over the years the estates have become residential in character, with the majority of chalets used as sole or second homes. The main issue, which is set out in the report before you this evening, is about the flood risk associated with occupation of these properties. So the chalets are located in flood zone 3, so that's the area defined as having a high probability of flooding. And modelling of potential flooding in this area has shown that the area would flood to between 1 and 3 metres deep in about 15 minutes. So the issue of flooding, if it happened, would be a serious one for anybody occupying properties in this area. The proposal to allow permanent occupation is contrary to national and local planning policy. Both require a sequential approach to locating new development, and clearly there are other areas in tendering which are at less risk of flooding where development could be located. That might seem a funny thing to say given that the property is already there, but it's not there as an all year round sole residential property. So it's still relevant to consider that use in terms of the sequential approach and think about whether there are different locations where dwellings could be located. The Environment Agency has raised an objection in principle to the application on flood risk grounds, and obviously the Environment Agency are the statutory consultees in relation to flooding issues. The agency agrees with the Council that the permanent residential use of the chalet should be classified as highly vulnerable, and notes that the NPPG finds highly vulnerable uses inappropriate in flood zone 3, so there's that clear conflict with national policy. In addition, a flood risk assessment hasn't been submitted with this planning application, and the agency advises that that in itself would be sufficient reason to refuse planning permission. A flood risk assessment is really vital for the Council to make an informed decision about the risks of the development that's proposed. And the agency also notes that an emergency flood response plan to ensure the safety of the development hasn't been proposed, so that's about what would happen in the case of an emergency. So, although some other policy issues are covered in your report, as I say, the primary issue to consider here is that around flood risk and the conflict between this proposal and both national and local policy. And so the recommendation of officers is that planning permission be refused for various flood-related reasons which are set out in full in the report before you. Thank you, Chair.
I don't have a member of the public speaking either for or against the application, and the parish hasn't sent a representative, but the ward members are represented by Councillor Michael Talbot. So if Michael would like to come forward. Welcome, and you have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got no complicated planning arguments to put. That put as the local member. This is the area I live in myself. My house is on that map that's on the table in front of you now. And I'm their local member. I haven't actually had any conversation with the applicant, so this isn't on a personal basis. It's the fact that I just know the area. Number 55 Colne is well known to me, being 294 paces from my own house, and I measured it the other day in anticipation of coming here. I began delivering a monthly parish magazine to properties in Point Clear Bay, starting with the February edition in the year 2000. By October of that year 2000, number 55 Colne was added to my list, and I noted on my sheet that the property was occupied by Brian and Gwendolyn Noble. I continued to deliver the magazine to this address for the next 17 years, only ceasing last year when I had a hip operation. The magazine is only delivered free to residents who live in the Bay, since holiday makers who want one can purchase it in the village at £1 a copy. The above is just to illustrate from my own records that I know with certainty that this property has been occupied as a permanent home of the applicant and her late husband, he died last year, Brian, for many years. The construction of these properties was first discussed and agreed nearly 60 years ago in the late 1950s, when the officers and members making the decision would have been well aware that in 1953 people were drowned all along the east coast of England and in the Thames estuary. They therefore made their decision to grant permission with the restricted occupation in winter to save lives, should such an inundation ever occur again. The property, now known as number 55 Colne before you today, is one of the above properties. The owner is applying for de facto recognition of her current occupation. This means removing the long-standing occupation restriction on the property. I would suggest to you members that the risk today in 2018 is much more a risk to property than it is to human lives. So obviously a factor all those years ago following the East Coast floods. And let me explain why. In 1953, there was no Point Clear Bay seawall, only an earth bank. The present seawall was constructed in 1963. There were no local radio stations to broadcast warnings to local residents in 1953. Local stations only began slowly, with the first being Radio Leicester on the 8th of November 1967. Very few property owners had the use of a motor car, which in 1959 was still a rarity. Local authorities had little or no flood protection. Today we have whole processes set up to deal with emergency situations with special committee of officers with specific duties. Today, the police have a system in hand to canvass properties at risk of flooding. In fact, I myself was called upon by the police and advised to evacuate, which I did, on the 5th of December 2013. The Environment Agency has a system of telephoning residents who have registered with them for emergency calls. In 1959, a mobile phone was only something in a comic book, but today they are absolutely everywhere. And to finish, most of the properties have permission from tendering and the inspectors to occupy their properties outside the original restriction any weekend from midday Friday to midday the following Monday, and for 10 continuous days over Christmas and the New Year. It begs the question, how do you know that 55 Colne will only flood on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday? And does this not mean that the supposed risk to life, which is advanced by this council for enforcing the original planning conditions, is nothing but a fraud? The Environment Agency opposes the application. But truly, could they say anything else? Our officers oppose the application, but could they say anything else? Of course, they must read the rules and are forced to object. But you, elected members in our democracy, can use common sense and grant Gwendolyn Noble permission to continue to occupy her home without harassment from any authority. No precedent would be set by this. Her home does not belong to a site owner enjoying security of tenure only for so long as an annual rent or an annual lease is paid, where their security lasts as long as the year. She is her own site owner. Her property is freehold, as are all the others in Point Clear Bay, and her home should be her castle, free from siege. I urge you all to grant her application based on good common sense and current practice, rather than just reading the rules. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much. No other speakers. Kath, would you like to add anything before we debate?
Perhaps just pick up on a couple of points if I may, Chair. Councillor Talbot, amongst other things he said, pointed out that technology's moved on a lot since these properties were originally built and the original conditions were applied. But obviously national planning policy and indeed local planning policy has also been rewritten in that time and has been made in the context of that new technology, understanding full well the sort of current risks and the current opportunities people have to communicate and be warned of flood. And so those things have sort of moved with the times, and there still is a clear and very strong conflict between what's being proposed here and the national and local policy. Councillor Talbot mentioned that this particular applicant has occupied the property continuously for, I think to his knowledge, at least 17 years, I think he said, while he was delivering leaflets to the property. It's not possible for the applicant in this case to be issued with a certificate of lawful development, so they're not able to provide evidence that they have lived there for over 10 years and therefore for the occupation to be lawful, because an enforcement notice was issued back in 2000 against such occupation, which sort of, the colloquial term is it stops the clock, and so any occupation after that time sort of can't be taken into account for the purposes of issuing a certificate. So a breach was known about, an enforcement notice was served, and the sort of clock was stopped. The other thing perhaps is worth pointing out is St Osyth Parish Council's comment, which was they may or may not be able to support the proposal, but suggest waiting until appeals elsewhere in this area are considered by an inspector. The council has served a significant number of enforcement notices in this area because of alleged breaches of the conditions. Appeals have been made, and we're waiting at the moment for dates for those to be heard. And clearly, as we do in other cases, we would take on board the outcome of those appeals in the way we would deal with other applications. So at the moment, officers' advice is there's a very clear conflict between this proposal and national policy. It might be something that would be revisited if the appeals on properties in similar circumstances sort of indicated that we should look at it differently at some point in the future. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Speakers? Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, apparently there's 72 enforcement notices around this area. I don't know exactly which ones they are amongst all that, but this number 55 is one of them. And I cannot see why we can interfere with anything that's going to take place, like an appeal. I think this should be refused, because until the appeal is heard, we don't know anything. I mean, we could say yes, and then she get it knocked back on appeal. I don't know how that stands. I really don't know. But I still believe we should refuse this one and wait on the appeal for the others, for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McWilliams?
Catherine, to say something.
Do you want to reply to that particular one?
It's quite a specific point, just to be clear, that an enforcement notice was served on this property, but the occupier or owner of the property didn't appeal against that notice, so it takes effect. So we're not waiting for an appeal on this particular property, but we are on many other properties in the area. And I think if appeals on other properties in the area were successful, i.e. they were allowed, then we would obviously take that on board in the future in looking at applications on here. So I'm agreeing with you, Councillor Holmes, in terms of my advice would be to wait before approving this sort of application in this area until the outcome of the appeals, but there won't be one specifically relating to this property.
Right, Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. To be honest, and knowing what the situations can be like with where we're just really that much off having flood situations in the last 12 months, I could never forgive myself if anything actually happened to this lady because of that. But I do understand what is being said, and I understand what is being said by Councillor Talbot. But I rather believe that our planning officers are quite right in what they're saying, that we should be waiting until appeals elsewhere have been sorted out. So I rather agree with the fact that we should be actually refusing this application as has been recommended by our officers. And I'd like to put that forward. Thank you.
Right. I don't know whether Councillor Holmes was proposing it.
I'll second it.
Oh.
And Councillor Benson, then
Yes.
Councillor Cawthorne, and then me.
Councillor Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Kath mentioned that the sea can flood between 1 and 3 metres in 15 minutes. So if that happened in the middle of the night when the owner was in her single-storey dwelling with her internet router submerged by water, her mobile on her bedside cabinet submerged by water, and her car submerged by water, there would be no escape. So that, for that reason, I agree with the proposer and seconder that we should be refusing this application.
Thank you. Councillor Cawthorne?
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation on that flooding to several metres in 15 minutes. That's very emotive. We would have quite a notice of that event occurring, perhaps 72 hours, maybe even longer, so it doesn't suddenly happen from nowhere. So that's an observation. A second observation is that there are existing flood defences, and they're calculated, but a 1 in 200 year event still wouldn't breach the existing sea defences at 4.33 above ordnance datum, I think it's called. So 2 observations there, but a question of clarification. 610 says that there is an ongoing appeal for this property about the certificate of existing lawful use, and I think that's where Councillor Holmes might have got his impression from. Could you clarify, please?
Thank you. Cheers. Yes, sorry, there is no appeal against the enforcement notice. So that's most of the notices in the area are. We've served a lot of enforcement notices, and we're waiting for the outcome of those notices on other properties. This occupier hasn't appealed against the service of that notice, so there will be no appeal decision in that respect. They also made an application for a certificate of lawful use. That's the one that we didn't issue because we're arguing that the previous enforcement notice stopped the clock, and therefore they can't provide evidence to demonstrate that. Yeah, and so they've appealed against that part of it. So that's the sort of legal certificate of use rather than the planning enforcement notice. Okay.
Right. It's just information as a result of the research on this, just a little snippet of information without commenting too much. I've been recently given a document issued by the effectively a government diktat about climate warming, and it's based the increase on the heights of the tide since 1900, and up to 2017 every year the tide has increased by an average out of 1.4 millimetres. It is coming up, and this document goes on to say by, I think it's 2000 and either 70 or 80, there will be undoubtedly a considerable amount of inundation. Councillor Cawthorne is right, of course. Nowadays, you've got a warning system which we didn't have in 53. In 53, there were people drowned 6 hours before the high water got to us because there weren't means of communications. But nevertheless, if it overtopped, and I just, again, a little bit of warning, on the date that Councillor Talbot was evacuated from this property, the high tide then was projected to be over the seawall. there was a change of wind direction 2 hours before high water. High water still reached within 8 inches of the top of the seawall. And if it hadn't been for the change of wind direction, I think we'd have had this area completely flooded. Points of information. Sorry, Councillor Heaney.
Well, I was going to make the same point as Councillor Benson, and I was also going to make the point about the wind. If the wind suddenly comes up, especially from the north, that's when you get the inundations. I was born in Kent, and I'm old enough to remember the 1953 floods and what an absolute disaster that was. And looking at this chalet, which we couldn't see today, it's right down on the marshes and would be one of the first ones hit. And although the police come round warning you, it doesn't necessarily mean if you're asleep or something like that, you know, the light's off, they don't know, or you don't hear, or, you know, you might not know about it until it's too late. And the fact that it can go up to 3 metres in 15 minutes, to me, is an absolute disaster. So I have to support the officers on this application.
Right, further points? No? Now let's get it sorted. We've got, did Councillor Hone propose it and Councillor McWilliams seconded it? Or the other way round? The other way round. Right, the other way round, right. We'll turn it round so that you know what you're talking on or what you're going to vote on. And those are the recommendations at page 129 through to 130. So that's what you're voting on. Those in favour of refusal as laid out in that situation, please show. Right. And those against, one. That is refused. Right, now, councillors, you've been on the go for 2.5 hours. I would suggest we have a 5-minute break, I think.
It's needed.
Yeah, that's not great.
Do you want to turn it a little bit?
Now it's open. It's seen over.